5 minutes. 5 minutes after her heart had stopped beating, Layla recalled her brother's birth. A memory that carried with it the taste and smell of spiced goat stew, cumin, fennel seeds, cloves, onions, tomatoes, tail fat and goat's meat. She was 7 years old when the baby arrived. Tarkan, the much-coveted son. Baba was on cloud 9. All these years he had been waiting for this moment. As soon as his second wife went into labor, he downed a glass of raki and locked himself in a room where he remained sprawled on the sofa for hours, chewing at his lower lip, fingering his rosary beads, just like he had done on the day Layla was born. Although the birth took place in the afternoon, on an unusually balmy day in March 1954, Layla was not allowed to see the baby until later in the evening. She ran her hand through her hair and approached the cradle, cautiously, her face set in an expression she had already decided on. How determined she was not to like this boy, an unwanted intruder in her life. But the very second her gaze landed on his rosebud face, doughy cheeks and knees dimpled like soft clay, she knew it was impossible for her not to love her brother. She waited, utterly still, as though she expected to hear a word of greeting from him. There was something extraordinary in his features. Just as a wayfarer, entranced by a sweet melody, might stop and listen intently for its source, so she tried to make sense of him. She was surprised to notice that, unlike anyone else in the family, her brother's nose seemed flattened and his eyes were slanted slightly upwards. He had the air of one who had traveled from afar to get to this place. This made her love him even more. "Auntie, can I touch him?" Sitting up in the wrought iron, 4-poster bed, Binaz smiled. There were dark bags under her eyes and the delicate skin over her cheekbones seemed stretched tight. All throughout the afternoon she had been in the company of the midwife and the neighbors. Now that they were gone, she savored this quiet moment with Layla and her son. "Of course you may, my dear." The cradle, which Baba had carved out of cherry wood and painted sapphire blue, was decorated with evil eye beads dangling from its handle. Every time a lorry passed outside, rattling the windows, the beads, caught in the glare of the headlights, slowly rotated like planets in a solar system of their own. Layla held out her index finger to the baby, who instantly grasped it and pulled it towards his velvet mouth. "Auntie, look. He doesn't want me to go." "That's because he loves you." "He does. But he doesn't even know me." Binaz winked. "He must have seen your picture in the school of heaven." "What? Don't you know, up there in the 7th heaven there is a huge school with hundreds of classrooms." Layla smiled. For Auntie, whose own lack of formal education was a source of enduring regret, that must have been her idea of paradise. Now that Layla had started school herself and had seen what it was like, she strongly disagreed. "There. The students are unborn babies," Binaz carried on, unaware of the child's thoughts. "Instead of desks, they have cradles facing a long blackboard. Do you know why?" Blowing a strand of hair out of her eyes, Layla shook her head. "Because on that blackboard are pictures of men, women, children, so many of them. Each baby chooses the family he'd like to join. As soon as your brother saw your face, he said to the angel on duty, 'That's it. I want her to be my sister. Please send me to Van.'" Layla's smile grew wider. Out of the corner of her eye she glimpsed a feather drifting away, perhaps from a pigeon hiding on the roof or an angel flying overhead. Despite her reservations about school, she decided that she liked Auntie's version of paradise. Binaz said, "From now on, we'll be inseparable, you, me and the baby. Remember our secret?" Layla drew a sharp breath. Since that waxing day last year, neither of them had brought up the subject. "We'll tell your brother that I am your mother, not Suzanne. Then the three of us will have one big secret." Layla considered this. In her experience, a secret was meant to stay between two people. She was still thinking about this when the sound of the doorbell reverberated through the house. She heard her mother open the door. Voices amplified in the corridor. Familiar voices. Uncle and his wife and their 3 sons had come to congratulate them. No sooner had the guests entered the room than a shadow passed across Layla's face. She took a step back, extricating herself from her brother's silky grip. Her brows pulled into a frown. She fixed her gaze on the rows of fallow deer that walked clockwise around the border of the Persian carpet in perfect symmetry. They reminded her of the way she and the other children, clad in black uniforms and carrying satchels, marched in single file to their classrooms each morning. Quietly, Layla sat down on the floor and pulled her legs up beneath her, studying the carpet. Upon closer inspection, she noticed that not all the deer were following the rules. Was one of them standing still, front hooves poised, head turned longingly backwards, tempted perhaps to set off in the opposite direction towards a wooded valley, rich in willows? She squinted at the wayward creature until her vision blurred, and the deer, as though magically animated, moved towards her, sunshine radiating through its majestic antlers. Inhaling the scent of the grassland, the child extended her hand towards the animal. If only she could jump on its back and ride off out of this room. Meanwhile, no one was paying Layla any attention. They were all gathered around the baby. "He's a bit chubby, isn't he?" said Uncle. Gently, he took Tarkan out of the cradle and lifted him up. The baby seemed very floppy, and appeared to have a very short neck. Something was not right. But Uncle pretended not to have noticed it. "He'll be a wrestler, my nephew." Baba raked his fingers through his copious hair. "Oh, I wouldn't want him to be a wrestler. My son will be a minister." "Please, not a politician," said Mother. They laughed. "Well, I told the midwife to take his umbilical cord to the mayor's office. If she can't get in, she promised to hide it in the garden. So don't be surprised if my son becomes the mayor of this town one day." "Look, he's smiling. I think he agrees," said Uncle's wife, her lipstick a bright pink. They all fawned over Tarkan, passing him around, making cooing sounds and uttering pleasantries that might not even have been words. Baba's eyes fell on Layla. "Why are you so silent?" Uncle turned towards Layla with an inquisitive expression. "Yes, why is my favorite niece not talking today?" She did not answer. "Come, join us." Uncle fingered his chin, a gesture she had seen him make before when he was about to utter a witticism or launch into a funny story. "I'm fine here." Her voice trailed off. Uncle's gaze shifted from curiosity to something that resembled suspicion. Seeing him scrutinize her like that, Layla was overcome by a wave of anxiety. She felt ill to her stomach. Slowly, she stood up. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other and composed herself. Her hands, after straightening the front of her skirt, became perfectly still. "May I go now, Baba? I've got homework." The grown-ups smiled at her knowingly. "That's okay, dear," said Baba. "Go and study." As Layla walked out of the room, her footsteps muffled by the carpet where a lonely deer stood abandoned, she heard Uncle whisper behind her back, "Oh, bless her. She's jealous of the baby. Poor darling." The next morning Baba visited a glassmaker and ordered an evil eye bead, bluer than the skies and larger than a prayer rug. On the 40th day following Tarkan's birth, he sacrificed 3 goats and distributed their meat to the poor. And, for a while, he was a happy, proud man. Months later, 2 grains of rice appeared in Tarkan's mouth. Now that he had his first teeth, it was time to determine the boy's future profession. All the neighboring women were invited. And they came, dressed neither as conservatively as they would on a Quran reading day, nor as boldly as they would if it were leg waxing day. Today their clothes were somewhere in between, signifying motherhood, domestic life. A large, white umbrella was held open above Tarkan's head, on which they poured a pot full of cooked wheat berries. The baby looked a little startled as he watched the wheat raining down on him, but to everyone's relief he did not cry. He had passed the first test. He would be a strong man. Now he was made to sit on the carpet, surrounded by a range of objects: a wad of money, a stethoscope, a tie, a mirror, a rosary, a book, a pair of scissors. If he chose the money, he'd become a banker; if the stethoscope, a doctor; if the tie, a government official; if the mirror, a hairdresser; if the rosary, an imam; if the book, a teacher; and if he motioned towards the scissors instead, he was sure to follow in his father's footsteps, becoming a tailor. Forming a semicircle, inching closer, the women waited, barely breathing. Auntie's face was pure concentration, her eyes slightly glazed and fixed on a single target, like a person about to swat a fly. Layla suppressed an urge to laugh. She glanced at her brother, who was sucking his thumb, unaware that he was at a critical crossroads, about to choose the course of his destiny. "Come this way, darling," said Auntie, gesturing towards the book. Wouldn't it be nice if her son became a teacher, or, even better, a headmaster? She would visit him every week, sauntering through the school gates with pride, welcome, at last, in a place she had longed to be part of as a child, but from which she had been excluded. "No, this way," said Mother, pointing at the rosary. As far as she was concerned, nothing was as prestigious as having an imam in the family, a good deed that would bring them all closer to God. "Are you out of your minds?" piped up an elderly neighbor. "Everyone needs a doctor." With her chin she pointed towards the stethoscope while her eyes followed the baby and her voice trickled with honey. "Come over here, dear child." "Well, I'd say lawyers earn more money than anyone," said the woman sitting next to her. "Clearly you've forgotten that. I don't see a copy of the Constitution here." Meanwhile, Tarkan's puzzled eyes scanned the objects around him. Not interested in any of them, he turned his back to the guests. That was when he caught sight of Layla, who was standing silently behind him. Instantly, the baby's expression softened. He reached out towards his sister, pulled off Layla's bracelet, of brown leather braiding with a blue satin cord woven through it, and held it in the air. "Ha! He doesn't want to be a teacher, or an imam," said Layla with a chuckle. "He wants to be me." And the girl's joy was so pure and spontaneous that the grown-ups, despite their disappointment, felt obliged to join her laughter.